Hello friends, Jeff here. Welcome to Squadron, welcome to Squadron Facebook Live. Another Friday, another week passed. It looked like I've been here yesterday, and here we are again doing a live session. Now this weekend it's going to be good weather, so I'm going to go camping, and I'm all excited about that, so I can't wait to get out of here and just go and sit in the wild for a couple of days. But before we do that, we're going to talk about glue. Now, you might say glue is what is to talk about, because it's a pretty boring subject, but it's not actually. And I have my friend here, Robert Morrison. He will tell you a little bit more about glue. So let's go out, let's talk a little bit about what different kind of glues there are and what they are for, because there is, you might think that there is not a lot of difference, but yet there is. So, and also, I got a lot of questions like, what glue do you recommend, what glue do you use, what glue should I use for this kind of plastic. So hopefully in this session of Facebook Live we can shed a little light on that. Now it all started with this, and I don't know if the older generation will recognize this, especially the people that live in Europe. It's the Britfix 77, and I don't know how many tubes of glue I used back then, but this is the one that was pretty common way back then over there. Now, I used for the first, let's say 10 years, 15 years of my model building career, let's say, I used tube glue. And when I went to the club, like a local model club, one guy brought in plastic cement, and it looked like water, and I could not wrap my head around it that you could glue stuff with something that looked like water, and I was really against it until I tried it. So let's see what we have in store here. Hopefully we can wrap this up and not take too much of your time, but we have a lot to talk about. So let's walk over and hey Robert, hey. Thank you for coming again.
Thank you, Jeff.
Let me go the other way.
Hey Jeff, watch out for coyotes from Vernon.
Oh, coyotes? Oh, okay. All right, Vernon, thanks for tuning in. So maybe we can move the camera a little bit closer. Now, first of all, I talked to Robert about glue, and I said, if you could help me out, and I asked him to bring a couple bottles over until he arrived with a truck and brought all these bottles in. That's when I realized I was in trouble, because my glue skills or knowledge of glue is a little limited to a couple things that I brought here. So let's first try, and you know what, I've already talked about the Britfix 77 tube. So it's basically a gel glue. It's old. I don't know if it's in production anymore. I doubt it, but this is the thing that I used to use, and then it was replaced, I think, by testers. They had something similar. But for the professional model builder, or the one that if you take model building serious, I think model glue or tube glue is not really the thing that you want to use, and it's more for kids. So if you have some kids that basically you want to start out in the hobby, I think this is the safest way. They can't knock it over, they can't make a mess. So for a kid, I would recommend this. For everybody else, we can look at the whole array of glues that we have. Now, personally, before I let Robert loose on the world, telling us about his experience with the glue. The glues I use the most are basically here in front of me, and the one that I grab most of them is the tester's glue, and of course Squadron's own plastic Weld. Now, the difference between this is basically the same, and in all the liquid glues, it's the same kind of material. There is a toluene in there. Everything has a little bit of methanol, ethanol, and ketone. But the formula for every manufacturer is a little bit different. Some of them, they make it a little bit more aggressive than others. Others make it create a little bit more time. So it used to be like, for instance, the Tenax, this kind of glue. It was a little hard to basically get your brush into the bottle, and by the time you get to the plastic part, it was already evaporated. So these glues work really well to use on canopies because it dries faster and it prevents fogging inside the canopy. But it's also a little bit annoying because you by the time let's say you have to do a fuselage and you have to go all around the edges, by the time you're at the end, the front is already dried up. So that's why I like to use the testers too, the testers plastic cement. For everything else, I use the Squadron's plastic weld. And then of course there is the Mr. Hobby glue. It's the same thing like Tamiya, and then of course there is some other generic glues out there. But I'm going to give the word to Robert here because I think he knows a lot more. He did a lot of research on that, and he can tell you what basically glue to use on with what particular plastic. So maybe you can start with whatever you want, like
Okay.
A little bit about it. Maybe start with the Tamiya glue or something. We have somebody?
Why don't we do a few shout outs first?
Mm-hmm.
Mac McCune and Vernon Piera, David Mason, Victor, I'm going to kill this last name, Senaceros, Jan Dorn Johansson from Denmark.
Oh, hey, Jan.
Harold Lichtman
Oh, yeah.
and Patrick McCarthy all say hi. Vernon wanted to know which of those glues did you use on your 1 to 32 HKB17?
Oh, that's actually the plastic weld and the Tamiya thin glue. And hey guys, thanks for tuning in. So glad you're here again. But yes, on the B17 that I'm still building, I use the Squadron's plastic weld and the Tamiya super thin. I think you have it here, extra thin. I think, yes, this one. So that's and the reason I use the Tamiya is because I think you super glue this thing together.
No, I closed the bottle before I came over here.
Well, I can't get it. See, this is how weak I am.
Here, use this one.
Anyway, the reason I like to use that kind of a thing is because it has a very tiny brush in there, like super smart. So you don't really have to get like a paintbrush. You can use a brush inside the bottle. So anyway, so okay, Robert.
Okay. Well, thanks, Jeff. The first thing I want to do is talk about how glues work, and that will help you to decide which one to put on which model. So let's start with the little plastic glue we've all, as kids, use. You can still buy this, and let's talk about what it does when you put it on the model. This type of glue comes out in a gel, and you apply it to the model. Well, what it does is it forms a crystal surface between two pots. So you take two pots, you put the glue in the middle, and what it does is it holds these two together. It creates a bond. It does not affect the plastic. Over time, it'll eventually turn yellow and crystallize and break. And so that's why we don't really use it that much anymore. Well, then the industry came back with these liquid glues, which Jeff had talked about. And I've got 3 different kinds. Well, we've got these different kinds. These came off my hobby table this morning. And so what I want to do is talk about these 3 different kinds because they all do something different. Everyone's familiar with the green top. This works really well with Tamiya plastics and most of your plastics out of China. It works really well. This Tamiya glue is a fast setting glue, which I use for tack welding. It will set up almost instantaneous when you put 2 pots together. And it's great for very small, little delicate pieces, especially if you're in 1/72nd. And you got to put a little piece on a tank or an airplane. You put this in, you put the pot together, you touch it, and it grabs. It doesn't have the same bonding strength as this, but working together, they can achieve different accomplishments with your model. Now this one you're probably familiar with. This is more like a liquid glue. It's really thick. This one, when I'm putting an airplane together, when I put the wing together, you usually have that flat piece where the flaps go. This you can brush on with the large applicator and then stick those 2 together and then slowly work your way around the thin side of the wing. Now, as time goes on, this gets a little thick, so you add a little bit of this and it'll thin it out. But the question is, what is this glue actually doing to the plastic is the most important thing. This is chemically designed so when you put 2 pieces of plastic together, like this, and you put the glue in the middle, what it's doing is it's creating heat and it's melting the 2 pieces of plastic together. And if you've ever noticed, if you put the glue in there and you squeeze it, you'll see it come out the side, it squirts out. That means you got a really tight bond and you can come sand it, and when you're done, you most likely have no seam. And that's what it's doing, it's welding. Now, you have to understand this welding process in the types of plastics. You put too much of this on a Hasegawa kit, which is a very hard plastic. What happens is this continues the chemical reaction beyond what you may see at the surface. So you put it on there, you put your fuselage together, you come back the next day and there's a divot. You go, where'd that come from? Well, the reason is this glue is still burning its way through the Hasegawa plastic and is literally disintegrating the plastic. So you want to put, if you use this glue, a smaller amount. Now there is a way around this, and there's another glue, which is this glue, which is in between these two. And I would use this on a stronger plastic, a more brittle plastic. And what it does, it doesn't create as much heat as this one does, but it's more workable than this one. And that's what I'm looking at, is the heat effect on my plastic, and when will that process stop so I don't end up coming back the next day with a divot. Or if you've ever put a model kit together and you take some glue and say, oh, there's a little hole, I'll just kind of fill it with glue. This doesn't fill the hole. What it does is it burns the hole and creates a deeper groove. This will fill the hole, but it makes a mess. So don't use this as a filler, because you'll end up with a bigger hole, because it's actually burning out the plastic. It's welding the plastic. And so when you pick your glue, there's this, and there's this, the Squadron. They're chemically very, very similar, but the amount of heat that they produce is different depending on the plastic. And so what I would suggest you do as you build your inventory of glues is take a piece of the sprue gate, just cut it away, make it even, and test your glue to see how it works before you start building your model, and find the best glue that you like. Or if you're on a budget, just pick one and go with it. Just understand, too much glue can create damage rather than bonding, and not enough glue doesn't quite get you there. So learn how to play with your glues and you'll be fine.
Yeah, because it's sometimes pretty tempting. Like for instance, you have an airplane and you try to eliminate the seam where the wing touches the fuselage, and you have this little tiny gap in there, and it's so tempting to take a brush and basically go over there with, I still do it. I still tempt it once in a while to try to eliminate the seam by adding too much glue. But then eventually, if you pick the wrong glue, it will start eating there, and then the next morning when you wake up, you have a whole thing that is actually a worse scenario than before, because it starts eating the plastic away. And I had it once in a while, and it sometimes when you use softer plastic, because there is several. Not all kits are the same. Not all brands are the same. There is like a low injection plastic molding, and there is of course the steel injection molding, and the plastic is harder in some than others. So let's say that you use a soft plastic, and you can immediately feel it. When you start to cut or sand something. When you glue something together and you hold it and you try to eliminate the seam and you put some tape around it, hold it together, and then you start sanding it, sometimes 2 days later when you look back to it and you hold it to the light, you can see again a little dip in there all along the seam because of the glue still eating through the plastic. So you have to be really, really careful in how you do that. And never, ever, ever, of course, use a plastic glue as a filler. Or somebody, I did that a couple times too, where I tried to put nose weight in the front of the airplane, and I tried to really glue it in there so the plastic would melt, but then it would also hold the weight in place, and that was before Superglue and all that. And honestly, it will burn all the way. The weight will go all the way through the plastic. So be very, very careful. I mean, all these glues are fine because they all carry basically the same ingredient, but you really, really have to be careful what you glue with it, and which glue you use for that particular, or which particular kit. That's a couple times I really, really cursed myself for trying a shortcut, and it blew back up in my face. So, but at the end of the day, all these glues will work. Like Robert said, if you just want to use one, just pick one and it will do the job. But just try it first before you actually apply it to a model.
Right. Yeah. As far as the plastic goes, what Jeff was saying, he's correct. And if you look at most plastic model kits, if you look on the sprue where the letter is for that identifies the sprue. If you flip it over, you'll see a little PS, which means polystyrene. All of these are for polystyrene plastic. There's another type of plastic, which the best analogy I can give you is an RC car. That is a more durable plastic. That's called ABS plastic. These will not really glue ABS. They'll kind of hold it together, and you need a different type of glue, which is more like this.
Yeah, the Squadron glue will go on ABS. We tested that last couple of weeks ago.
Now, some of the companies do make it. I found online that Tamiya makes an ABS glue. That is designed for dissimilar plastics, and there's others. You can get at the hobby shop. Plastistruck makes one. And so if you're scratch building or something and you've got a piece of plastic, you like it, but you can't seem to glue it, you probably want an ABS, but you have to remember that's a very hot glue, and you know it may damage your polystyrene glue, plastic. So when you're bringing dissimilar pieces of plastic together, test it out first to see which glue will actually bond the two without damaging your finished product. So there is a difference. If you ever go to a hobby store and you're not sure about the glue, just make sure it's for polystyrene and not ABS plastic, because it will literally dissolve your model kit. It's not the right kind of glue. I don't have any. This is probably the closest to ABS, but usually the bottom will say ABS plastic on it, and it's a completely different kind of plastic. You can buy ABS. Plastistruck sells it for building buildings and everything. It's the gray Plastistruck pieces, and that requires ABS glue. The polystyrene will work with it, but it won't bond it as tight. So that's a little bit about plastic glue. So let's switch over to superglue and talk about the limitations of superglue. And what I've done is I brought some samples here from the house. And first of all, I want to talk about what does superglue do when it bonds two pieces together. And I'm going to make an illustration with these two bottles. If you put the superglue over here on the side of your piece, and you put this piece together and you squeeze them together and hold it tight for a minute or so, it'll create a bond that's almost impermeable to being separated. I mean, pulled apart. That's the way superglue works. Now, the same piece, if you take it and do this, which they call lateral shear, it'll ping off. And the reason is superglue is designed to adhere to a surface, but the surface tension of the superglue, let me fix this.
Time for your pill, Robert.
Yeah, time for my pill.
Live TV. I got a hammer.
Yeah. I got it. It's called lateral shear. And what happens is if the superglue at all on a lateral like this will break. It's designed not to hold. It's just the way the glue works. But you can't pull it away this way. And that's why superglue works. If you remember the old commercial back when they first started, they had a guy hanging off with his plastic helmet. He was hanging off a thing and he wouldn't fall. Well, yeah, he wouldn't fall. But if you touched that little thing he was hanging on this way, he would have fallen. And this is one of the problems we have with PE on a model. We'll get it to stick and we're happy, and then we'll touch it and it pings off and off it goes. Well, how do we fix that? Well, there is a way to fix that, and that is one of these glues. This is basically white glue. It's a upgraded version of Elmer's glue. And I like this one by Microsoft Industries and this one here by Perfect Plastic. Now what I would do is I would take my little pot here, let's say it's this little piece here, and I want to glue it on here with some super glue. So I'll put the super glue on there and I'll glue it like that. And after about a minute, after the super glue is done, I will take a drop of this and I will put it over the surface so it basically covers my little pot here. And what that does is it stops the pinging action or the lateral shear. It has just enough strength to give resistance to this movement. And that resistance is just enough to hold your little PE pot in place. The nice thing about these glues is they dry crystal clear and you can paint over them. If you get a little too much on there, you can kind of wipe it down, but you just put a drop and it stops that lateral shearing.
It also shrinks a lot too.
Yeah.
So even if you have a little kind of a blob or something, and we're talking about microscopical. Let's say if you have to glue a little bit of PE, like let's say a little bracket or something on plastic, you don't have to put like a real blob on there. You just do a little tiny bit around it. Like Robert says, it's just to prevent the shearing
Right.
action. So, but honestly, I never tried it, but it's amazing that I can do that, because if you think about it, it looks unbelievable, but
Right.
apparently it works.
It's just enough strength. Now, it's not going to, you can't glue pieces to the model and expect this to hold. It's not designed to do that. But it's just enough to stop, if you touch it, that little bit of shear, which will break this bond and keep your piece from jumping around. Now, if you want something more permanent to stop this shear, is you take your super glue and take a piece of a little plastic card, or what I do is a little container cover, and you put a couple drops on there, and you take some talcum powder or some Almond Ham and baking soda, and you put it in there, you stir it up, and you create a little gel. You put that in there, you stick these together, and now you've got a very, very permanent bond. And that's not going to break, because what happens is when you add the talcum or the baking soda or baking powder, baking soda works better, that the crystals in that powder combine with this to create a stronger bond. And what happens is the crystallines stop the lateral shear, because now you got to break those crystals within the surface of this, and so that's why it tends to work better, and you can do a lot more with it. But once you do that, and if you don't like it and you pull it apart, it's very difficult to remove it. This is a that formula is very difficult to sand. It's like a rock. Now, with the super glue, I want to talk about a couple other things real quick. And I brought little tubes, a big tube, and you've probably seen the big bottles of super glue about this big. First thing to remember is super glue has a shelf life of 1 year from every manufacturer. After that, it begins chemically degrading. So remember that. If you're a model builder like all of us, I would go with these little teeny tubes because they're economical. And why are they economical? For this reason. Once you break the seal, and if you notice, all of these have a seal that you have to break. And once you break that seal, a chemical reaction begins. And what that chemical reaction is the humidity within the air touches the super glue. And humidity is what causes super glue to actually bond to a surface. If you put super glue on a perfectly dry surface with zero humidity, it will not stick. It won't chemically react. It needs a certain amount of moisture. And I'll give you an example. If you ever put super glue on your finger and stuck your finger together, the reason it bonds so quickly is we have moisture in our skin. And that's why it's so hard to pull apart. So when you break the seal, it begins degrading. And you've probably had super glue after a while. It just doesn't work with the things going, solid. Or in this case, I have this big pen bottle. Well, this is about 1 year old. This was a gel. The gel is still in stable format, but when I put it on a model, it won't stick. And what's happened is the super glue has degraded and is basically worthless. And so from an economy standpoint, don't buy these big bottles because you're going to throw almost all of it away. Buy these little ones, get your job done, throw it away, and you can either do the gel or the liquid. So this is just a little tip, but that's why super glue works the way it does, is understanding it has a very short time life within the tube. Moisture affects it, and I'm not saying go out and wet your model before you put the super glue on it, because it won't work. Too much moisture will cause the super glue to basically congeal instantly, and you end up with a little droplet. And that won't accomplish anything. So the humidity is enough in our air is sufficient to make it work. And so these are some of the things with super glue. But remember, after you open the tube, it's going to start degrading, and eventually it'll fail within a short amount of time, especially these big bottles. Because once you open the bottle, the air space in the bottle begins a chemical reaction, and it slowly starts failing, even though you may see a liquid or eventually it will turn solid. So these are the things with super glue to remember. Now, one other thing I was going to mention to you about glue is epoxy. Now, I picked these up at Home Depot. Epoxies are all the same. It's a 2-chemical process. I like the 2 tubes. Sometimes you can buy it in a syringe, which has
I've seen those.
Both pieces, and they chemically give you a 50-50 mix. This one particularly here, the black tube, is the epoxy, and it has a metal fibers in it, and that's why they call it liquid steel. The fibers help the epoxy bond tighter. And so what you do is you put a dab on each one, you take them and you stir them up together if you want, and you can change the ratio slightly to give you different drying time. These take about 5 minutes.
Oh, I was just asking, how much time do you have to?
Yeah, 5 minutes of working time within this. Within 30 minutes, this is rock solid. Where would I use this in a model? I would use it in a place where you can't see something, and I really need a tight bond, or a piece of any other type of plastic. It is sandable, but it's very difficult to work with. There are different types of epoxies. If you go to a Home Depot or Lowe's and you actually look at them, they are designed to do different tasks. And so if you want one of these, just understand that it's being applied to accomplish the job you want, and it's just not generic. They're very specifically designed. And that's a little bit about epoxies. The other thing you can do is make your own glue.
That's another thing.
Oh, what?
No. Making your own glue. I remember way back when I was still stuck with the tube, and I didn't want to change my point of view, because I was like adamant that this was the glue. So then they said at the time, when you have plastic glue and you really want to make it a little bit more thicker or consistent, or a little bit more like where you have create more time to apply it, you throw plastic in there. Like pieces of plastic, and they melt, because eventually that's what it does. It's a very aggressive chemical reaction that happens, and it will melt the plastic, and the plastic will become part of the glue. So you have like a thicker, you basically, if you throw enough plastic in there, it becomes a gel again. So I think that's something that you try to.
That's perfect timing. Gary had 2 questions right down that line. He said that he does make a filler using sprue from the kit and glue.
Yeah.
And he wanted to know what we recommend with regards to gap filling, using a glue versus using a putty.
Okay, that's exactly what we have here on the table.
Yeah. Well, first of all, what I usually do for a gap filler, and maybe some people will say, well, that's maybe not the way to go, but I always had very good success with Superglue. Just put Superglue in there, and like I said, sometimes when the gap is big enough and you have to add some talcum powder, you can have really like a hard surface. Again, to Robert's point, it's very hard to sand. But I use all kind of putty. Sometimes if you have to fill a seam where it's hard to reach and hard to sand, I like to use milliput or an epoxy putty, like we demonstrated last week, because eventually, or you can apply it, and you can, if you use enough water or a brush or something, you can already smooth it without sanding, and it becomes rock hard. It will also super smooth when you sand it, and then you can paint it without problem. So it all depends. Or you can make something of, I think you're going to explain.
Yeah, I've got 2 different types of glue I've made. This one here, this is why I save my old glue bottles. I'll just open this one up. This is white. I don't know if you can see that. What I've done here is put Tamiya glue inside of here, and this is white styrene sheets. Everybody has white styrene. That's all that's in this bottle. And there's a reason why I have just white styrene in here. It's because of the chemicals inside of the styrene plastic. This one here is gray, and this is spruce that I put in here. And what happens is you get 2 different responses from this. This will fill a gap. You paint it on the gap, and you got to let it dry. It'll take several hours or overnight to dry, and it's perfectly sandable. This is white styrene. It sands well. And because it's uniformly the same type of plastic, it'll attach itself to almost any model. It's like putting a styrene strip on there. I don't contaminate this styrene with any other plastic. I can adjust the viscosity by adding a certain amount of glue. I can make it thicker or thinner. And actually I have some others that are thicker and thinner depending on how I want to apply it. This, I would say, is the best you can get. If you go and use sprues, what happens is whatever manufacturer you get your plastic from, they're all slightly different compositions. If you start mixing the sprue, even though it looks gray, you're going to have a different mixture in there, and as a result, you're not going to get the same result. This will, if you put this on a model to fill a gap, you could have shrinkage. It's because as it dries, the polystyrene from the model kit is dissolving. Whereas this, I can control, it won't dissolve as fast. So if you use the polystyrene off the sprue, you're not going to get the same quality as if you use regular styrene sheets. Will this glue two pieces together? Yes. I like this sometimes on an airplane wing I know I'm going to have a lot of problems with. Instead of using one of my regular glues, I'll use this as the glue. I push the two pieces together, it squirts out the side, I don't care about it, that's what my sander's for, and I got a nice clean seam. If I sand it down correctly, the seam will disappear. That's what these two are for. They're homemade, they're easy to make. You just pour the glue in there, you stick the sheets in there, give it 3 or 4 minutes, and you'll see the sheet literally dissolving. Don't put big chunks in there because it takes forever to melt. What I use is a very thin strips of styrene, and I just cut them into little pieces and drop them in there, and they'll melt away within hours. And this will last as long as it doesn't, you just keep putting some glue in there, and it's good forever. So that's a couple hints on glue, and that's our glue.
All right, well, I hope we were able to shed some light on everything. But again, you guys, I mean, this is really the extreme if you really get into the nitty-gritty of gluing stuff together. And I mean, I encourage you to absolutely experiment with it. But if you just want to have some fun and build something straight out of the box, you can't go wrong with just the commercial glue that is available, or the plastic cement or plastic weld. It will do the trick. But if you want to go more into scratch building and want to glue some different material together, then you might, hopefully you'll get some information of what Robert just told you. So is there anything new that we need to?
We want to give a shout out to Robert Chubb. Gary Kawabata is watching. Of course, Jerry Hendrickson.
Okay, Jerry.
Bob DiGiorno.
Hey, Bob.
Del Giorno. And Jan and Bob both give you a shout out because they felt this was a brilliant talk and very helpful. So kudos from the two of them for what you presented today.
Yeah, thank you very much, guys, for the nice comments. I wouldn't have made it without Robert, because like
David
I said,
Mason as well, really enjoyed it.
Oh, okay, because I wanted to talk about these two glues this morning, and until he showed up, and then of course now I learned a lot of stuff today, honestly, and I'm doing this for quite some time, so I appreciate it, Robert, your insight on this. And then our next step is to raffle off our little helicopter that we put up last week. So I'll have Robert do the honors again. Try the lucky winner.
Where do these proceeds? Who's that?
Oh, Cyrus 10. Hey Cyrus, thank you for participating. You won the helicopter here. I know Cyrus, we go back a long time, so glad to hear from you again. So please let us know, call our customer service or send us an email and with your address, and then we'll get this kit out to you as soon as possible. And I hope to see you next IPMS here in San Marcos. So, okay. So for next week's raffle, we're going to raffle off the Hobby Boss Tomcat 1/72 scale. I'm sure there are some 72nd scale people out there that will appreciate this. So next week I'll leave a comment in our comment section on our Facebook video or on our YouTube video. Actually, you're eligible to participate in the drawing, and next week we'll raffle off this. Then last but not least, of course, share this with your friends and family. Of course, we need a lot more help to make this a bigger event. Then also we have an action going on. I think it's 25% this weekend off on trumpeter kits. And then, as you can tell, we also launched the duffel bag swag line of Squadron t-shirts. So please go on the website and you can see all about it. Shall I stand up? Yeah. We got a couple more, and then we'll add some stuff as we go. With all new graphic detail or whatever it is, but this is one of them, so please check it out on our website at squadron.com, and you can see the whole thing, what we have available. For now, I think we did it all. It went pretty well, so I thank you guys for tuning in. Like I said before, share this with everybody and leave a comment, and hopefully you'll all have a wonderful weekend. This is it for now. Jeff here and Robert signing off.